Hey, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club, Kids Edition. Always my favorite because, kids are the future. This is the show this is our last show of 2025. It's the December show. And we are ending with a banger of a book. Maybe that's not the right, maybe banger is not quite the right word. The cutest book, though, by far, that we've done all year and maybe in a year or two. It is such a sweet and adorable book, and it's charming and it's fun, and we just loved it. And the book is Detective Beans and the Case of the Missing Hat. And here is our author, Lee Chen. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. All the way from New Zealand. She's all the way from New Zealand. So that's really, really cool.
Yeah, almost a whole day from the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Monday at 7 a.m. where she is. So that's really awesome. We all loved it. All the staff all just fell in love with this book. And it's also, for if it helps you at all, it has been selling really, really well. Like, we show it to kids and parents, and they're like, oh, that's adorable. And they really, really, really love it. So yeah.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. My pleasure. So, the first question is always the same. I like this question because I think it gets kind of to the heart of what we're doing. And it's this. Why comics? Of all the things that you could be doing, of all the ways that you could express yourself, what is it about comics that speaks to you, that thrills you, that excites you, particularly when comics are extremely labor intensive and, don't necessarily make a lot of money. So yeah, why comics?
But Brian's you're basically like, why are you crazy in this specific way? Yeah.
Well,
why haven't you got a real
crazy
job
in this particular way? So it's a back and forth question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually have to admit something that I don't like admitting, which is I actually don't read a lot of comics, which is quite strange considering my job. But for some reason, when I was little, I really loved reading books, chapter books, like Goosebump books, Babysitter's Club. I love reading books. And then I always really loved drawing as well. And then as I was older, I, decided that maybe I'll go into some sort of design sort of field because I just really love drawing. And I actually studied architecture at university. And then I graduated and I couldn't find a job. It was during the recession. And I used to read some web comics, so Penny Arcade and things like that. And at the time, I foolishly thought, well, this looks kind of easy. Like, maybe I could give this a go. Doesn't look that hard, 3 to 4 panels. So I thought, okay, well, I'll start a web comic and see how that goes. And it turned out to be a lot of work. But I really fell in love with the whole process of making. And I feel like I really like telling sort of silly little stories, and I love drawing. And so I think it's like the best marriage between those things, having words and having pictures. And so that's kind of how I fell into it. And as I've been making more and more comics, I just realized this is actually what I really like doing. So yeah, that's kind of how I started.
Yeah, I'm fascinated that architecture, because I would not necessarily look at your artwork and go, this person has an architecture background. And maybe that this is an insane thing to say, but to me, architecture is all like, right angles,
Yeah.
And your art is so like cartoony and curvy and flowy.
Thank you so much, Brian, because I personally feel like it's the opposite. I'm always fighting against that instinct to make straight lines straight, to make sure, everything is ruled properly. I also do this thing that my partner, who's also a comic artist, finds a little bit crazy, and he makes fun of me for it, where I measure out the exact ratio of, say, like Bean's head to his body to his legs compared to other characters. And then every time I have to draw them in the same panel, I measure it, and then I like work out the ratio so I can draw them so that they're the exact same ratio. And my partner's always like, it doesn't matter. Like, as long as it looks kind of right, it's fine. No one's going around your book with a ruler to make sure that everything is, exactly the way it's supposed to be. But I just get really caught up on those little details, I guess, from my architecture background. So I'm just like, okay, well, his head is a fraction of a little bit smaller than it usually is. And I'm trying to let that go a little bit and be a little bit more free, because I think art that I like is a lot more free than my art that feels like, you know, a straight line doesn't have to be straight. It can be a little bit wonky, and everything can have a little bit of a sort of, you know, weird sort of angle to it. And it has this sort of nice sort of handmade look. But I feel like sometimes when I'm drawing, it looks very much like, okay, you know, I drew this in SketchUp or something like that, you know, or some sort of 3D design sort of program, because I can't, you know, windows and stuff. I have to make sure like every pane is the same size and everything. It's a whole nightmare.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with your partner. Nobody cares. Nobody can tell either, you know. Though I appreciate you going through that extra step to make yourself satisfied with your art.
I think I'm just a little bit insane. That's what it is.
Yes, well, that's sort of the nature of comics, I think, is that we're all just a little bit insane. So did I receive from that answer that you work digitally and not pen and ink?
I actually used to exclusively work with just pencil and paper. So when I first started my first comic, which is still going, Extraordinary, which is where my name Exo Comics comes from, I did it all pencil and paper. I went through a long phase where I denied the existence of computers, much to like everyone around me's frustration. Even at university, I did a lot of my work by hand when a lot of people were working like, you know, with CAD and stuff like that. I think because I got a computer quite late in life, and so I just never really got into them as much as maybe other people my age who maybe grew up with them a little bit more. And so for a long time, I was like, no, I'm going to do everything by hand. I hate computers. I remember having to work in Photoshop at university and just thinking like, this is so overwhelming. There's a million buttons. I'm worried I'm going to push the wrong one and the computer's going to explode. Have you seen that meme picture of a remote, and it's like how your grandma sees the remote, and it's like, don't press this button, the whole house will explode, you know, things like that's how I look at a computer. Well, at least how I did look at a computer. And then as I was sort of getting into webcomics a little bit more, I was like, okay, well, how about I get a Wacom tablet and just have a little go and see how this works. And sort of took a while to get used to it, and then gradually found out what you know, some of the buttons in Photoshop do. And now I actually mainly exclusively work digitally. So all of this is done digitally, but I do work across several programs and several devices. So for all my line work, because I still like the tactile feeling of drawing on paper, I draw on the iPad because then I can physically draw on the screen. I think I use Procreate, which I think is an amazing piece of software. They have great brushes, and I think it's just like pretty much the next best thing from drawing on paper. So do all my, you know, thumbnailing, sketching, final line work on Procreate, and then I export the file into Photoshop onto my computer, because then I have access to some different brushes, I have access to more layers and things like that, and then I color them usually in Photoshop. Yeah.
Interesting. The because you mentioned that you like the feeling of the pen on the paper, but do you have that feeling on an iPad?
I mean, I think it's pretty close.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. I know it sounds silly because I know it's kind of completely different in a way, because obviously it's like the plastic of the pencil on the glass, you know, of the iPad. But there is something about the way they interact and behave that feels very similar to drawing on paper. I mean, obviously not exactly the same. And it also obviously is a lot easier, because then you can stretch things if you realize you haven't drawn them quite the right shape and things like that, and you can undo and use different brushes and things like that. So I still try to draw on paper regularly because I don't want to ever lose that skill. But I have sort of, migrated a lot to digital. But I still prefer to keep my digital art looking a bit like it's done on paper. So I like to use pencil brushes and stuff like that. So it still kind of looks like maybe it was drawn and scanned in. And then it's just a lot easier in terms of like when I did draw on paper and scan it in, just the cleaning up process is such a long, arduous process, getting all the marks out, but not losing any details. Sometimes it can look overexposed and things like that. And I found all of that quite frustrating. And especially if you want to change things later on, you realize, oh, actually, I want to flip these two characters around. It's like a whole ordeal because everything's on that flat layer, and just drawing everything digitally, I feel like gives you a lot more options, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
To go back to to where we kind of started before with you working out the ratios and stuff, isn't that easily changed in digital? Like if you go, oh, beans is too large in this, you just shrink it down, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can shrink them down a bit, or you can grab both Beans and his mum in the same panel and be
Right.
like, I want them both a little bit smaller, and so then they, shrink at the same ratio and things like that. Or yeah, I want this slightly bigger. Or I find all of that. It's just so much easier when you do it digitally.
Yeah,
And I
sure.
think especially for me, because I already work kind of slow, so if I don't have those extra little, little sort of extra perks in my back pocket, I think it would take me years and years to finish anything. If I was drawing this on paper, I'd be like, okay, well, Brian, good luck with your life. I'll see you in 20 years, and then I'll show you my book.
Yeah. So the web comic that you do, are you doing like just one strip a week? Is that your kind of output, or do you do
Yeah,
more than that?
so for a long time it was once a week,
Mhm.
and then recently, especially when I started working on Detective Beans, it's dropped off a little bit, because I just needed so much time to actually make the graphic novel. So
Sure.
now it's kind of every 2 weeks, and then if I'm busy or I've got a deadline coming up with my publishers, it's a little less than that. But I also try to make other like silly drawings and stuff for social media because I don't like the idea of not posting for a long time.
Sure.
But that is something that my webcomic, I still want to keep it going. It's not something I'm looking to finish anytime soon. But yeah, I don't post every week anymore.
Yeah. Does it is web comics something that you're making a viable income from, or is it something that you're
Yeah.
doing because you enjoy doing it?
Yeah. Well, when I first started, I think my webcomic has been going for maybe 13 years now.
Wow.
So so a long time, 13, 14, 15 years, quite a long time. I think I started in 2009, I'm not quite sure. But for a while, it was definitely something I wanted to do for fun, because after I graduated from architecture, I couldn't find an architecture job. So I was working in just an office job. And I found it quite creatively unfulfilling because I was just sort of doing a lot of, emails and photocopying and stuff like that. Not quite the same as going to architecture school. And so I thought, okay, I need to have a personal project. I need to keep that sort of like creativity going. Because I feel like sometimes if I'm not creative for a long time, it's hard to get back into it. It's like going to the gym or working out a muscle. So I felt like, okay, well, even though I don't have an architecture job, I need to do something creative and feel like, that part of my life is still going somewhere. So I started it, and then it was going kind of well, and it was kind of fun. And it was, for a long time, it was kind of a side project. And then I think in 2012, I got the opportunity to use Kickstarter, back before it opened to the rest of the world, and it was American exclusive. I sort of knew these people that were using an American sort of contact to do it through America. And they sort of said, Lee, do you want to do something with your comics? Because I had a little bit of a following then. And I thought, okay, well, let's just try and use Kickstarter, and maybe I could print the first 2 volumes of my webcomic, because I had over 200 comics. I'm like, I could do 100 comics a book because they're only 4 panels, so they only take up 1 page. And I was like, okay, well, let's just give that a go, because, there's no downside to it. If I don't get the amount that I ask for, then it just doesn't go anywhere. And then it turned out to be really successful, and I hit my goal in 4 days. And then by the end of the 30 days, I think I was almost at double what I asked for. And then it was at that point. So the first half of the first 4 days, I was just like, yes, like, getting 4 hours of sleep a night because I just can't keep, get off my phone. I'm just checking, another pledge, getting really excited. And then after I reached the goal, this sort of weird reality set in where I was like, okay, well, I know nothing about book design, and now I have to make 2 books. What have I done? And I just decided at that point, I'll quit my day job for a while so I can get this done. And then we'll see how it goes. Maybe I could do this full time, but if anything bad happens, I can always go back and find a real job, which was a big step for me because I am a planner. I'm not one of those people that can just sort of like go with the flow. I'm not a chill person. I'm a very neurotic person, actually. And so the idea of giving away such stability and, for something so fickle was really, really scary for me. And so I made the books. It turned out okay. And then I thought, okay, well, I'll just do this for a while. And so I was sort of getting money from people buying merch and doing commissions, selling prints and stuff like that. And then I made it work, and from then onwards. So I've been doing sort of working for myself, making comics since 2012.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I mean that's exciting because a lot of people try to do that and it just doesn't work out, and that you were able to make that work is really exciting. Where did Detective Beans come from? What was the genesis of this particular book?
I think it started all because I love cats to an obsessive point. Love cats a lot. I have 2 cats. And I just decided, okay, well, once I've been making, I was making exocomics, and then I would do these little drawings, and I used to draw just like little scenes, like of a marketplace, and they were all cats. And I always thought that's kind of like fun in a sort of Richard Scarry kind of way. Like, what if you just had a cute little town, everyone was cats? And then I sort of was drawing these little pictures, and I realized, I think I'd like to tell stories in this place. And not just draw one panel drawings. I'd love to tell stories. And for quite a few years, I just thought, okay, I'd love to make a comic called Cat Town where everyone is cats. But that was like as far as I'd gone. I didn't know sort of where I wanted to start and I find the beginning of projects really daunting where you have to come up with characters and they have to have personalities and all that sort of good stuff, which I think is, I guess, kind of necessary if you're going to tell stories. Found that really hard. And so for ages, it was sort of on the back burner. It was something I wanted to do, but I couldn't really think of characters and stuff yet. And then it was only a few years ago that I was doodling again and I drew Beans. I drew this little kitten. He's wearing an oversized trench coat. And I just thought, he looks really funny and cute. And his personality just kind of fell into place for me. And it was just like, well, he's obviously small and he's obviously, wanting to look bigger. He's a detective of some sort. And then as I sort of thought about him and drew him more, I just thought, I think he's my way into Cat Town. That, Cat Town will be mostly about him and the rest of the town and how he sees it through his eyes. So then at that point, I already had a Patreon page. And I just thought, okay, well, maybe because I knew they were going to be longer than 4-panel comics, which would take me a lot of time, which means I can't take on as many commissions and things like that. I thought, okay, well, I'll make it a Patreon exclusive, and then I'll get my fans to maybe help me draw this so that, I don't get a huge dip in my income while I work on this. So I made the first one, posted it, and I said, this is kind of what I want to do. If you guys are on board, I'm going to be doing it on Patreon. And my fans were great. A bunch of people signed up. They were really, really supportive. And so I made that for, I think, about 2 years. And then a publisher reached out to me, Penguin Australia. And so they were kind of like, we've seen your stuff, do you have anything that you want to maybe pitch us? We would be open to that. And at that time, I just thought, okay, well, I'm working on this cat comic at the moment. It's called Cat Town. There's a little cat. He's a detective. Is that something you'd be interested in? And they said, yeah, that is something that we'd be interested in. So then I ended up making that book. And so Cat Town and Detective Beans technically are kind of basically the same. Cat Town's more smaller episodic stories, but they're all based on Beans. And so Detective Beans is the first book of this length I've ever made. Before this, the longest thing I'd ever made is like 2 pages in a row, honestly.
Right.
Yeah. So I used to, even with the longest stories in Cat Town, I wouldn't plan ahead. I would just sort of, I'll make 2 pages, have a rough idea of where I want the story to go, but not sort of really fleshed out. And then every week, as I had to make another one, or every other week, I was just like, okay, well, I'll just make it up as I go along. It's okay. It's only 2 pages. And then when I got the publishing deal, they were like, we want 208 pages. And I was kind of like, wait, what? That's a lot. That's 100 times more pages than I've ever done before in my life.
Yeah.
So it was stressful, but it was really fun, and I'm happy with how it turned out.
Yeah. How what's the difference for you between sort of doing those 2 pages on the fly and doing 208 pages? Like, what did you have to adjust kind of in your head, right, to be able
Yeah.
to sustain a narrative over that kind of period of time?
Well, the first thing I did was I know this sounds kind of silly, but I didn't know how much story you could tell in 208 pages, because I'm only ever used to working in either 4 panels for Exocomics or 2 pages at a time for Cat Town. And when I was working 2 pages at a time, it was kind of like, I maybe will have a story about, Beans meets this particular character. And then, in my mind, I might say, okay, well, I think the storyline is going to take maybe 4 weeks in total, 8 pages. And then as I made it, I would realize, oh, there's actually some gags I'd like to, there's this sort of like side quest that I'd like to explore. And then at the end, you realize, oh, this whole storyline took 20 pages. This is a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. And so the first scary thing for me was like, we have a set amount of pages for this book. My publishers were very, very exact about that. They want 208 pages, like exactly, no more, no less.
Sure.
So that was kind of daunting. I was like, I don't know how much story you can tell in 208 pages, as weird as that sounds. And then I came up with the idea of him losing his hat. And then I sort of came up with all the sort of places that he might want to go to, and sort of planned out enough that I thought maybe would fill 208 pages, but I wasn't sure at all. And so then I sort of sent off the story outline, and they wrote back and they were just like, yeah, okay, go ahead. That's good. So I thought, okay, well, they've done this before. So if it wasn't enough story, I think they would have told me. And then also, once I start thumbnailing, if I realize, oh, it's too small or it's too big, I can edit on the fly. Or, especially if it's too short, I can always add some extra gags, maybe add a whole different scene or whatever. So I was thumbnailing for a long time because I really wanted to get that part right, because, everything else rests on that. And I didn't want to waste time working on something later on when I should have fixed it here. And during that time, I was still kind of stressed out about it, because I was like, I don't really know if this is the right length or whatever. And then once I sort of finalized my thumbnails, I put them into Clip Studio Paint so I could move them around and get all the pages teed up. And it just happened to work out to be exactly 208 pages. So I was extremely lucky. And now that I'm working on, so my second book is coming out next year, which is a collection of the Cat Town stories. So that one doesn't require quite as much work. I'm still finishing it up. But I'm currently also working on my third book, which is going to be a full graphic novel like the first one. And I'm still going through the same thing. And I think a lot of people think that, oh, you've gone through it once, you know how it goes. But with every story, it's different. So I'm going through that stage at the moment where I'm like, I don't know if this is enough story or too much, or go through the same thing, really. Yeah. It's like I learned nothing.
Yeah. I'm shocked, maybe is the right word, that you hit 208 exactly.
Yeah.
Without having to like go and edit it or change it. That's
it was, yeah.
Did you like kind of get into it like to page 196 and went, okay, there's only 14 pages left, and then wrap it up in 14 pages, or did you just happen to work out?
When I was thumbnailing, I just have like my on my iPad, I just set it up as a grid. So at that point when I'm thumbnailing and I've finished and I've said, this is sort of all the panels I want to have, I had no idea if it would fit into 208 pages at that point. And then I think I may have worked out, it was a little while ago now, so I think I counted how many panels I had. And then I divide that by how many pages I had. So I had a rough idea of how many panels I would have to have per page. And so I think I kind of knew in the back of my mind, oh, I need like maybe at least 4 panels, I think 4 or 5 panels per page. So while I was laying it out, I just thought, okay, well, I want this page to end on this beat. So this one is going to have, maybe 6 panels, which is quite a lot. And then I thought, okay, well, keeping in mind that I should have sort of an average of 4, maybe in the next few pages where it makes sense, I could have like a full page, or if this beat is kind of funny, I could just have 2 and it really emphasizes the timing. So I kind of had an idea, but I still wasn't quite sure. So when I got to the end and I looked at the page count to 208, it was kind of like, yes. But at the same time, if it hadn't quite worked out, I think I could have wiggled things around a little bit to make it fit.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like you didn't have a script at all. You had an outline, and then you went straight to thumbnails from an outline.
Yeah, so when I first started putting together my proposal, because I'd never done anything like that before, my agent sent me a few example ones to look at, and there was one that he sent me, and I thought, a proposal is what, like 5 pages, and it was like 50 pages.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like looking through it, and it had a full script, and I had no idea that was something that people did. Yeah. And I kind of panicked, and I said to my agent, I'm like, do I have to do this? Because I have no idea how to do this. And I don't think I can write down all the words without seeing all the pictures that go with it, if that makes sense. Because I just don't understand how you can just write that and just have it play out in your head and then sort of work out the timing and stuff. I don't know how to do that. And he said, oh no, that's fine. You can just write an outline. And I think that's just how I work better, like having a synopsis of the story and then just going straight into thumbnailing mode. Though when I handed in my outline for my 3rd book, I realized it was a bit longer and I had put in a lot more dialogue than my first one. My first one was a lot more like, and Beans goes to here and he has a conversation with this person, and then this person is a bit grumpy or whatever. And I realized in my next proposal, I guess because I'd already made one graphic novel, I was in the mode of thinking about a lot of dialogue. So I had a lot more like, this is the conversation that they'll probably have and things like that. But when I thumbnail, it also deviates a lot. So when I go back and look at my outline for book 1 and what I actually made, all the main points, it still hits the main points, but there are a lot of places where I realized, oh, this is actually better, or this is funnier, we should go in this direction, or something that took up one line in the outline, Beans walks to this place. When I started thumbnailing, I realized, this bit's actually really funny, and I want to stretch this out for like 2 or 3 pages, this bit that I thought would be a nothing thing. Yeah. So it kind of, it was kind of elastic in a way. Something stretched, something's, shifted, and it was really fun to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I love this thing about comics, that there's no one way to do them, right? Because I absolutely interview people who are like, oh no, I wrote a full like screenplay style script, page 1, panel 1, here's what happens, here's the dialogue, 8 panels on this page, right? Like, and they do it that way. And then I speak to people like you who are just like, no, I just kind of just start drawing it and I see what happens,
Yeah.
And both are equally valid. I don't really feel like that's particularly true in most other entertainment media. Like that's not the way. You can't do a movie like that, for example, right?
Yeah. I think also because comics is such a solitary activity, well, it can be, obviously. A lot of people can work with a writer or a artist. Everyone, I think, ends up coming up with sort of techniques that work for them. Yep. Whereas I guess if you're working on a movie, there has to be some sort of industry guideline so that everyone shows up on set and knows what they're doing and what is expected. So for a long time, even as I was working on this, I was like, I don't think I'm doing this right. Like, I think a real comic artist is going to show up and be like, Lee, what are you doing? This is not how we make comic books. And I didn't really even want to talk to people about it because I thought they'd be like, that's weird. Like, why didn't you do it this way or that way? Because I think another thing, like you were saying with the script, that a lot of people do, like especially, I guess we're talking about more film now as well. When you watch like a really good Pixar film and you're like, this is amazing, I'm going to go look at some behind the scenes stuff. And you realize they have pages and pages of just like character information, and that has the character and they're drawn from every which angle, and then they have all the information, they are like this and they grew up here, and they had this thing that happened in their childhood and their best friend is this and blah blah blah. I don't know how to do that, and I don't understand how people can do that. I think it's really oppressive when people can start a project and they have all the characters laid out and to very minute details. They grew up in this country and moved to this country and that's how they met this person. Yep. I find all of that really difficult because it doesn't feel organic to me for some reason. It just feels like now I'm just making up this person and people will be able to tell that I don't mean it or something. So to me, I always sort of start writing and then I encounter a character and then I sort of figure out what they're kind of like based on sort of what they're doing or what the scene is going to be like. Like, for instance, Beans, Detective Beans. Beans isn't his real name, I would say.
Okay.
I just, in my head, I just always thought of him as Detective Beans, but I don't know if that's his first name or his last name. And then in the book, his mum sometimes affectionately calls him Jelly Bean. And so I've seen reviews where people think Jelly Bean is his real name, but Jelly Bean is just a nickname that his mum gives him. So I don't really know that. Like, I don't even know why he lives with his mum and not his dad, or where his dad is, or things like that. I think if I am meant to know those things, a story will lead me in that direction at some point, and I'll think about it then. But right now, because there's the bit where he goes to a jazz club and they ask to see his ID, and he puts out a little ID that he's made himself. It says first name Detective, last name Beans.
Right.
And I just thought it's funny, but at the same time, it's kind of hiding the fact that I don't really know what his first or last name is or how that relates. Or maybe his mum and him, their last name is Beans and he has a different first name, but no one calls him by his first name. And I think there's something charming about that, because in movies, what I hate is a lot of over exposition.
Sure.
You know, when someone picks up the phone, they're like, "Hey, big sister Margot." And you're like, well, that felt a little bit unnecessary. And it kind of takes me out of the story a little bit. So I like sometimes stories where you're not quite sure the relationship between two different people, or you sort of pick things up along the way and then you picked it, you know, you pieced it all together yourself. That's kind of a thing I'm into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So you said that that the first Cat Town book was I think you said Penguin New Zealand, yeah?
Oh yeah. So I have two publishers. Penguin Australia publishes it in Australia and New Zealand, and then Andrews McMeel publishes it for everyone else.
That's interesting. So how did that part come along? I mean, and the reason I ask is because in my head I would think if Penguin Australia was publishing it, then Penguin United States would be the immediate place that would go, rather than Andrews McMeel.
Yeah, I think the very simple answer is that they just didn't really want it. Oh. So what happened first was I never ever thought about making a book, apart from the Kickstarter ones I published myself. So it wasn't until like a senior commissioner at Penguin Australia reached out to me and was like, you know, do you want to pitch something, that I really gave it some serious thought. And at that point, when I had written up the proposal, I sent it to them first, obviously, and they were like, this is great, we'll take it. And then my agent was basically like, do you guys want this worldwide? And they were like, no thanks. Probably because at that stage, and I totally don't blame them, I was an unknown entity. I'd never made anything like this before, never made, you know, published anything before. So they were kind of like, no, we're good. And I guess I'm not really sure how Penguin works internally, whether all the different countries are quite separate. But basically they were like, we don't want to get worldwide rights. And so then my agent took it to a bunch of other publishing houses. I got a lot of no's, and then I finally got a yes, which actually turned out to be very fortuitous, because I think at the beginning Penguin wanted to print it black and white. And then when Andrews McMeel came along, they were interested in having it in color, because I had some sample pages in my proposal and they said, you know, they like the color and they'd like it to keep it that way. So then we went back to Penguin and said, you know, Andrews McMeel would like it color. Would you guys like it in color too? And they were like, okay, you know. So that's how I ended up with two publishers, and that's just how it's going to be. Yeah.
Was the book finished when Andrews McMeel picked it up, or were you still in process?
I had done nothing on it. So I decided that I didn't want to start it if it didn't have a home, and an international home especially, because a lot of my fans are from US and EU. So I just thought, you know, I don't really want to sink. In the end, it was like 1.5 years of my time. To make something if it's not going to get everywhere I want it to be, especially if I know I have this following of people who want it. And I think it'd be really frustrating for them if they can't get it, or if the only way they can get it is to buy it from an Australian site and then obviously pay that extreme expensive shipping to get to
Sure.
the US, into Europe. So when I think Penguin came back to me and said, we'd like to offer you a contract, we kind of told them, can you just hang on for a second? We're just sorting out an international publisher. And then once Andrews McMeel came on board, then I said yes across the board to both. And then it was a sit down, have a panic attack, and then start actually making the book.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little nerve-wracking, I bet.
Yeah.
And now you have two different publishers who are like expecting a book, and you haven't made it yet.
Yeah. And also they were kind of like, which is a very, very, understandable question, which is, when do you think you'll finish the book? And I just thought, okay, well, I have absolutely no idea. And I actually had to go back to my agent and ask and be like, okay, I know this sounds like a really stupid question, and get ready, I'm going to ask you a lot of stupid questions. But my first stupid question is, how long does it take for people to write books? I'm like Googling this question as well. How long do people take to write books? And, obviously the internet is like, well, it depends on who it is and what they're making. And then I think my agent said, I think most people put down a year. And I was like, okay, we'll put down 1.5 years because I'm slow and I don't think I'll be able to do it as fast as other people. And I think during that time, I worked on it every other week, because I still wanted to keep up Cattown and Exo Comics. So I do 1 week book, 1 week Cattown, Exo Comics, 1 week book. Yeah. And it was extremely hectic. I was just working all the time, all through my weekends, all through the evenings, sort of thing, to get it finished. So I think next time round, I might have to cut back somewhere so that I can give myself a bit more time, because otherwise it is kind of scary how quickly you can burn out when you just have so many things. It's like, okay, be creative now, another story now. So I'm trying to take it a bit easy. And also, I think I heard this quote from somewhere that someone said, being creative is like, and making something creative is like breathing out. But in order to breathe out, you have to breathe in. And I think that really resonated with me, because I don't breathe in enough. I feel like I'm always making things. I'm always worried that I think also because, like you said, comics aren't a lucrative industry. And so I'm always worried that, my income is going to dry out, and, I'm going to, struggle, and then I'll have to go back and get a real job, really. So I'm always like, okay, I have to make something. I have to post something. I have to keep the social media going. I have to reply and do this and do that. But I just realized recently that I think I need to actually just take some time out to do other things. I've been making a lot of Lego, to just do things that I think then give you life experiences to draw on when you are making things. Because otherwise, if you're just a drawing robot machine, then you don't really have a lot to draw on in order to make new stories.
The other thing I'll say, Lee, is you've been doing comics and making them for, you said, between 13 and 15 years.
Yeah.
So I think you probably don't actually really have to worry about like having to go back and take an office job.
I don't know. I worry about that all the time. I also worry. I think I know
you've got 13 years of it already where you haven't had to go and do that.
Yeah,
probably.
But you feel like things can always change. The economy and things like that. Or you watch the news and everything seems horrible, and I think, well, no one's going to buy comic books anymore when all the world is burning. But also just things like I guess every creative goes through this, where you just go through periods where you're like, I don't know how to make things anymore. And you look at your old stuff and you just realize you have this, I used to be funny and now I'm not. Like I used to be like a person that can make things, and now I'm a burnt out husk of a person. And then you start, I guess sort of spiraling out of control, and you think, okay, well, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to have to do something else. Can I blow the dust off my, architecture degree? Can I go back to that? And you start sort of like, who am I? What am I doing? Sort of thing. And then you go through that for, a while, and then it slowly comes back up again. And then you think, oh, okay, well, I guess I can make a few things. And then it goes down again, and it's a sort of anxiety yo-yo.
Sure, I understand, and I'm not trying to minimize it. I'm just saying that this is sweet and adorable and charming, and it was funny. And it was solid, and the kids all loved it. And so I wouldn't worry about it as much. I would, if it helps you to breathe in, then be be a little calmer on that particular that one aspect of it, right? Like
Yeah.
you can create, you can make, you probably are not going to have to go get a desk job.
Brian, you'd think that. And if you were talking to a normal person, I would say, yes, everything you're saying makes sense. But so when I was making it, obviously, big anxiety was, am I going to finish it? Are people going to like it?
Yeah.
Spent a year and a half on it. And then it comes out, and the first day it comes out, I'm like almost vomiting. Just the stress of it all. And then after a few days, you start getting some good reviews, and you're like, oh, this is cool. And then for like 2 seconds, you're on cloud nine. You're thinking, I made something, people are enjoying it. But then comes the other thoughts, which is, I have to do this again. What if this is a fluke? What if, I've had all my life to come up with the first story, and now I have a year to come up with the second story. And I think I've just used up every good thought I've ever had in my entire life, I've used up in this. And now sometimes when I do get a good review, I still love it and it's great, but then it adds to that anxiety, which is, okay, well, now expectations are high. What are you going to do now? Yeah. So in a way, I guess that sort of weird anxiety part of my brain is never complete. It's never just like, you did a great job, let's relax. Everything is great, because the higher it goes, then it's like, okay, well, now you're going to fall at some stage. This can't keep going. And then if you do bad, then it's like we knew this was going to happen, so you screwed up there. So
I am sorry that you have those feelings, but I don't see it from the work. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's what
I'm sorry.
say.
I hope that doesn't sound too down. I love making it. Yeah.
I'm not trying to add to your burden at all. I'm trying to relieve your burden. That is what I'm trying to do.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I just don't want it to come across like I'm being ungrateful, because I know I'm extremely lucky to have the job that I have. Yeah. Extremely, extremely lucky. And I really, really enjoy it. I feel really, really lucky all the time. But I think it is difficult sometimes. I get into my own brain about it. And you just have those thoughts that when you're having a bad day, you still have to make things, because that's what your livelihood is based on. Yep. So sometimes it is a little daunting, but I love it. I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression. Love it.
Yeah. So Beans is not 208. Beans is 205 pages. Were you given more flexibility on this book, or did you just work it out?
They basically said, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
So basically they said the whole book has to be 208 pages. That's what they said to me.
I see.
So
okay.
they said leave one page for the title page and the copyright information. Yeah. And then I didn't know if I needed to leave any other pages. And so I laid it out. So when I was laying it out in Clip Studio Paint, I put in like, this is the blank page. This is where the inner title page is going to go. This is the copyright information page. Okay, now we start. Page 3, we start. And it happened to just fill out the rest of the book from there. Yeah. And then I think at some point there were some discussions with my publishers, like, do you want to have about the author page, or do you want to have this? And I was just like, there's no space, okay? There's no space. Unless you want to stretch it out to 216, I think, because it has to be an 8.
It's got to be an 8, yeah.
Yeah, and I said, unless you want to do that, there is no more space. It literally has to be the copyright information, and then we start the story, or else I'm going to have to really jiggle things around again. And they were like, okay, well, that's fine, which I prefer actually as well, because when I was little and I would read books and you get really into the story and the characters, and at the end there's like a picture of the author, and then there's some information about the author, and I kind of hated it. And I always thought it really, really just reminds you that the book you read isn't real. And then you look at a picture of this like middle-aged person and you're like, oh, it just sort of came from that person's head. Not that I don't want to acknowledge them, because obviously they're a genius. They've just made a book that I like. But there was something that sort of was jarring about it when you have sort of dived into this sort of fantastical world. So when they were like, do you want your photo on it? I was like, I don't want my photo on it. I want kids to read it and just see it and be like, maybe this actually just fell out of Cat Town. Like, one of the truck drivers from Cat Town just got lost a little bit and happened to end up in Human Town. And so we have this book now. That's the kind of vibe that I'd like to give.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. How about with the second and third graphic novels? Are they also strict on the page count, or are you getting more flexibility on those?
No, strict. So
Strict.
I think for book 2, which is so it's a collection of past Cat Town comics, all like a collection. I think at one point asked if I could have a few more pages because I was sort of laying things out and I thought I wouldn't have enough pages, and they were like, "No, we want 208." I mean, I don't know if it's just because I think it must be hard publishing now in this digital age, and people read less books than ever. And I think partially maybe because they have really fine-tuned what children want. So they have very sort of detailed, it has to be this long, has to be this length, has to be this size. We like the spine to be this size, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, they're still quite strict about that sort of thing. But apart from that, they are extremely flexible. So I can have anything I want in it, basically. I can have very grown-up words in it. I can have like melancholy. I can have philosophical, even though it's a book for middle graders, and they're like, that's fine. The kids will figure out what that means. But in terms of the, I guess, more technical specifications, they are a bit more strict about that.
Yeah, I mean, I am very strongly of the opinion that kids can handle almost any language. You don't want cursing and things like that, but if you use a word like melancholy, when I was a kid and I encountered a word I didn't know, I went over and grabbed the dictionary and looked it up and went, oh, now I learned something new, because kids love learning,
Yeah. And I think also sometimes when I was little, I was a bit lazier than you. I would find a word I didn't know, and then I was like, I could look it up in the dictionary, or I could sort of figure out what I think it means based on the words around it. I think it means a little bit sad, maybe. And then later on, sometimes it really backfires, because then you're grown up and you start using a word and people say, I don't think that means what you think it means, Lee. And you think, oh, I probably should have looked it up at some stage. But yeah, I think it's really fun. And I love, like I have a note in my phone that I keep like funny words or sayings that I like that I want to use in future books. And I love collecting just old sayings and things like that. Just things like buy gum. A lot of people don't use buy gum anymore. It's so good. Just little things like that. I've got to see a something about a something, or my dogs are barking for your feet are hurting.
Right.
Things like that. Yeah, pounding the pavement, stuff like that. I keep them all in a little file so I can use them, because I find them so fun. And I want to introduce kids to those fun olden day sort of sayings that I think don't get said enough.
Yeah. Like a detective is a gumshoe.
Yeah.
Who would know a gumshoe? What a weird word.
Yeah,
not
I love that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I really like what you did here. I don't know. It's so sweet.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
It's nice to have something that is that's kind of warm and charming like this, and not, because so many of the we were talking about it with the staff, and so many of the kids' books that are being put out these days are like, oh, here's a story about social anxiety, or here's a story about, I want to do well in a sport, but I'm not sure that I can do well in a sport, or things like that, like about fitting in. So they're all about fitting in. And I like the fact that there really wasn't anything like that here. It's just to be sweet and charming and fun and funny.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm actually a very anxious person in real life. I think I'm very different to Beans. Very anxious, everything has to be planned, very self-doubting. And so I think because I have all those constant sort of stressful thoughts, when I sit down to read something or watch something, I would like to watch something a little bit more funny and a little bit silly that sort of takes my mind out of my insane place. So I don't really like watching things that are too anxious or too scary, or especially not things that are going to make me cry a lot. I don't want to deal with that. I just want to escape to somewhere fun and, spend some time there with some quirky characters, and then leave and feel like, oh, well, that was kind of fun. I mean, not that there obviously isn't a place for the other books, because I think those books, I would have really benefited from them when I was at that age, maybe even now. But sometimes I just want to sit down, read something fun, and then not have to think about my feelings and stuff for a while. And that's something I'd like to make. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk maybe a little bit about the craft of comics in terms of, you were thumbnailing out the book, but you didn't, from what you were saying, have it worked out as pages, right? Like you were thinking about it in terms of panels. So when you're trying to assemble something like that into a page, what's your how do you think it through about what belongs on a page, what belongs on the next page? Where does
Yeah.
how does time flow and your eye flow on a page? And I'm always concerned with comics, particularly about the page turn, right? Where you get to your right hand page and you want something there that's going to go flip the page now and find out what happens.
Yeah, yeah. I totally understand. I think it's a lot of just jiggling things around, I think. So, sometimes when I am thumbnailing, there'll be a particular panel or certain amount of panels that I realize, okay, I definitely want this to be the last panel someone sees before they turn a page. This is definitely it. I'm not moving this. Lock that in place. And then I kind of work backwards. So maybe like 10 panels before that, there was also something that I wanted to be the last panel that someone sees. So then I think, okay, well, I've got 10 panels to fit into what is in between that. And then actually sometimes I will draw my thumbnails, put it into panels, and then realize actually if I could find just one more beat to add here, then the layout all shifts a little bit and it fits better. So then I'll actually keep it blank and I'm like, just stretch this little bit out a little bit more. And then other times when I realize this is going on a little bit too long and it's now ending in a place that I don't like, maybe we can edit this somewhere. Maybe we can make this a bit snappier, a bit more fun. And then I get very neurotic about panel sizes. So I'll read the same page. I mean, each page of this book, I must have read 20 to 30 times. And then just like things like, should this panel be a tiny, 2 millimeters bigger or smaller, to really give the right timing. So I'd read through it, look at the timing, and then be like, I feel like it lingers on this, but a tiny bit too long. Stretch that out a little bit more or make this a little bit smaller. Or sometimes when he's in the middle of fumbling with something, I'm like, okay, well, these 4 have to be together because they make sense read all together. And once one goes down to the next line, it adds in this time that I don't like. So then, I think, okay, well, these are just going to be they're just going to have to be a little bit taller and a little bit skinnier because otherwise the timing feels a bit off. Or can I take the ones on top and make those a little bit taller so these become a little bit shorter? It's a lot of playing around and seeing what works. And then other times, especially when he's traveling from one place to another, I thought, this is a good place to let the reader breathe a tiny bit. Or if a kid is reading it and maybe they need to go to school or something, this is a good place for them to stop. So usually when he's traveling from one place to another, I like to have at least one full page drawing or a double spread.
Yep.
And then it feels like we've traveled a little bit with him because I don't like the feeling that you're supposed to go somewhere and then the next page, we're there. It just feels a little too fast. So I try to read over things a million times and make sure that the timing really works. And I think that is like one of the most crucial parts of it. Even if I don't draw it well, and some pages I'm not completely happy with, as long as the timing feels right and the words I think are kind of right, then I'm pretty much happy with it.
Yeah. I find it interesting that you are doing so much of that in, I guess, what I would call the editing process rather than in the layout process, because I would generally say, and again, there's no one way to make comics at all, but most of the cartoonists that I talk to are figuring that out as they're doing the layouts, right? In fact, for the most part, most people are looking at the page as a unit rather than panels individually.
Yeah. I like how you're like, Brian's like, I'm not saying you're wrong, but
I'm not saying you're wrong.
No, I'm kidding. Not. Yeah, not saying you're wrong, but it is different from every other person I've ever spoken with.
Not ever. No, I've heard many people. Look, I say this a couple times too. I actually know a cartoonist who the very first thing that she does is she takes a blank piece of paper and she draws the color on the page with watercolor before she puts a single line on the page, and then the color says to her what she should draw. Now, in my brain, that's crazy, right? Like, and so my first question to her was, well, doesn't this mean like you throw out like every 10th page? She's like, no, I throw out every 3rd page, And I'm like, wow, how do you work like that? Like that you're doing all this work and then you're like, nope, that didn't work. And start again.
Couldn't do that. Yeah.
Right? Like, so
I hate
everybody
the
has
idea of
their
working
own
on
way of
something.
doing it,
Yeah. I hate the idea of working on something and throwing it away. And then I just feel like that time was now wasted. I'm so sort of, neurotic about things like that. But yeah, it is. I think this is how I worked when I made the web comics, which made sense because they were only ever 4 panels. So it's like I do 4 little doodles. They fit in 4 panels. That's just how it is. And because I did that for so long, that's just how I work now. And that's just, my brain is like, that's just how we work. You draw the little pictures, we put them in the little boxes later. And so to me, the thought of actually having to, I think also the thing that makes it easier is that it breaks all the tasks down into smaller tasks for me.
Sure.
So if I think of it as like, you don't have to think about pages at all. You don't have to think about colors. You don't even have to think a lot about even sort of the composition of the panel of the actual panel can change.
Yeah.
Don't worry about any of that for now. Let's just say what's happening in this particular moment of the story. Yeah. And you did that? Okay, great. Now what's happening in the next one? And then I think because that then breaks it down to small, it's more manageable for me and I don't freak out. Yeah. And then I look at all these thumbnails and I think, oh, look, Lee, look what you've made. You've made all these little pictures. And then I think, okay, well, let's just put these in the little boxes and see how they go. And then my brain switches into the next mode and say, okay, well, let's put them in boxes. Let's see how they go. Oh, that doesn't quite fit. Let's put it on the next page. And I think that's the only way I can work and not freak out over just the enormity of the task.
Sure.
It's just, concentrate. I think if I had to think about the thumbnails and each page at the same time, my brain would just explode. It would just be like, this is too many things to consider. What if this isn't the best way to lay it out? What if it's this? What if it's that? And then I think I just wouldn't get anything done. So, yeah.
Well, it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like what you're calling thumbnails are what other people might, in fact, call pencils.
Is there a difference? I don't actually know what that means.
Right. Well, it's okay. So a lot of people, and again, I'm not trying to suggest you change anything, but a lot of people like do thumbnails where they're literally, the reason they're called thumbnails, right, is because people draw pictures the size of their thumb, right? You're not trying to do the final drawing at that stage. You're just looking for kind of gesture, for flow, Does this look like it's telling the story along the page, right? And then the next step after you have your thumbnails all set up is then you go in and you actually start doing the drawing. Which is like a distinct step. Whereas it sounds like you're doing the drawing first and then making a page out of it later, which is a great way to do it. I'm not, I know. It's an interesting way of thinking about it, is what I'm saying.
I actually, my thumbnails are actually like that. They are extremely rough. I don't even show them to my publisher because I feel like they are illegible to people that aren't me. So I actually, so they are extremely scribbly and small. I draw them really small. And then it's not until I put them into the panels. The thing is, they don't fit the panels properly either. So I have all these little squares of thumbnails. And then once I get all the page layout done, I just put them in the middle, blop, blop, blop. So you have all these nice like shapes, and then each one just has this ugly square drawing in the middle of it. And then I do my pencils on top of that.
I see.
And then once they're at a pencil stage, then I will show other people that aren't me. Yeah, that's when I show publishers, because I think if I showed my editors before that, they would just be like, these are the scribblings of a crazy person. Can you clean this up so then we can understand what it says? So yeah, I think I just want to see how it looks immediately, sort of. I want to get through that stage fast, because then the actual drawing part is the bit I like the most.
Do you let your partner look at your thumbs?
So he my partner's Gregor. He makes a comic called Loading Artist, and also a web comic. So he's the only person that gets to look at them at that stage. And because he also works with comics, he gives me lots of great feedback. Every time I finish like a round of thumbnails, he always looks at them. And he does a sort of big show in a funny way of like taking out a red pen and like crossing things out and stuff like that. Like he's a teacher sort of thing in a funny way. And he'll be like, I guess it's always great to have that, because when you're the person making it, it's so easy to get so lost in the project that you can't see it from an external point of view anymore.
Yep.
So it's really great to have someone who can be like, this jumps really quickly from here to here. Or the scene goes on a little bit too long. I don't actually really understand his motivation for doing that,
Yep.
things like that. Whereas I guess when the characters live in your head for so long, you understand their motivation, but you realize that you haven't put that out explicitly for the reader yet. So he does a lot of stuff with me where he's like, I don't think this is what the character would do. I think you should maybe have this scene, which then explains why the character's doing this. And, he'll read through it at every stage. And then once I start doing pencils, he'll also give me, he was like, I think that you should do this from a different angle. This, perspective is a bit confusing, or these background colors I'm not really into, and vice versa. I also help him out with his stuff as well. Really handy to have someone like that.
Yeah. So does this mean that when you actually are handing your submitted pages to your editor, that there's not a lot of editing going on at that point?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what it's like for other people, but I think I handed in things to my publisher. So at the beginning, obviously the story outline, and they okay that. After that is my pencils, and I was very lucky that they didn't really have a lot to say. There were a few little things that I need to change, but very little. And the main editing that came back was just grammatical stuff. So I realized I never use commas. And so, they basically said commas everywhere. And just things like, when you have word ... I didn't realize you had to have word space dot space dot space dot. I think it's like a weird thing that they like to do and stuff like that. So there was a lot of, or spelling errors and things like that. But in terms of the actual layout or characters and stuff, they basically said nothing. Yeah. And then once I handed in sort of my final files, sort of pre-final where, things can still change, they were basically like that. Yeah, that looks great. Ship it. So I didn't get a lot of story editing feedback, which I think I was lucky about. And I think that's also because I'm so neurotic. When I do thumbnails, I go through them. I think I went through them 5 times, all the thumbnails. So every time I finish thumbnailing the whole book, read through it, get my partner to read through it, he changes stuff and things like that, or I decide there's bits I don't like, I draw the whole thing again. And I did that 5 or 6 times so I could get that right. And I think that's why my editor was like, okay, well, this looks fine. You neurotic person, go ahead.
Yeah. Wow. Because you said it took a year and a half to do the 208 pages. So that's like a page every other day, let's call it. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Is that, does that include all of the steps, including the lettering and the coloring, or is that just the drawing part for you?
So that year and a half was everything. So it was, everything from thumbnailing and then doing the cover, doing the back cover. I designed the book myself. It's everything. And it was a little scary at that time because I'd never made anything that big. I didn't really know what milestones or when I should be hitting them. So I think the first few stages took a long time. And by the time I finished my final line work, I was panicking a little bit because I was like, this feels like it's really close to the deadline. But then, of course, every stage takes a little less time, I think, than the stage before. So then coloring took a little less time. And I think by the time I handed in, I was quite comfortable. I had enough time to get everything in and didn't have to ask for extension or anything like that. But it was a little bit stressful. And I did work a lot of nights to like midnight sort of thing, just bent over my desk trying to, especially the backgrounds. I hate drawing backgrounds.
Yeah. Is it easier on book 2?
Book 2 is a weird anomaly because most of the work is already done.
Already drawn, right? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
how about where you are on book 3? Is it easier now?
Oh, I think it's in a way harder because I think now that people have, liked the book, and I've received so many nice comments from, kids and parents that said, I've liked this book. When's the next one coming out? that now I feel like there's a pressure where someone will see it at a bookstore and think, okay, well, I've read the previous one, I'd like to read this one. And so now I worry that people aren't going to like it as much or things like that. And it's kind of stressing me out a little bit at the moment. I've written the story outline and I've handed it in to my publishers and I'm waiting to get feedback at the moment. But it was just kind of hard because I've never written another book before, that it was just a little bit hard for me to grapple sort of like, I obviously, if I start writing a series of books, there are going to be themes that are similar in each book because people read it because they want to. But then how much of the story changes? What sort of technical elements do I keep? Does that make sense? I just don't really know the structure yet. So I've handed it in. I'm sort of interested to see what they're going to say. And I think because I'm sort of a little bit, I suffer from self-doubt. I think right now it could go from anywhere from we love it, start, or like we completely hate it, you have to write it again. But I think in the first book, even though it was daunting because it was my first book, the thing that sort of made it less daunting is that it's like, well, I'll give this a go. I've never done this before. I've been given this opportunity and I know I'm lucky to get it. You just give it a go. If it's a flop, it was a learning experience. But then I guess once that goes well, then now people are looking at you that now the second book almost has more pressure than the first. So that's kind of what I'm dealing with at the moment.
Don't beat up on yourself. That's all. Don't beat up on yourself. You're really good.
Thanks.
Yeah. What I was just about to ask something that I was thinking about when you were saying that answer, and now it's fallen out of my brain. What is
no. The next book? Something about the process?
Something about the next book. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, even book 2, I'll give you some time to think about it while I say some stuff about the next book. So even the book 2, I'm a little worried about because it's not the same as book 1, whereas it's not one long story. And it's all my Cat Town comics from the very first one. So when I went back and looked at them to edit them and get them ready for the book, some of them I'm like, this is not that great. I guess I've learned a lot since then. I've been working on this for now 2 years. And it's like, okay, well, I have to kind of put it in. The artwork also doesn't look that great. I hate looking at old work. And to the point where I kind of feel like I want to go back and redraw them. But I feel like then you're kind of destroying a bit of history there, kind of your own personal history. So I've sort of kept it the way it was. I've edited some things to make things a bit clearer. And also when I first started Cat Town, I used to hand letter.
Yeah.
But now I use a font. So I had to go back and put the font in. And now the font's kind of bigger than the words. So I've had to jiggle things around and stuff like that.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm a little worried that kids might read it and be like, this is not quite the same. Because it's not a full story, but it's still really fun, and there are lots of little stories, and I think they flesh out that world a little bit more, and there's a lot more like little sort of everyday stories. There's one where he goes to the beach with biscuits and his mum, and things like that happen. So it's not quite, I guess, as action-packed as maybe the first book, but it's action-packed in a smaller, quieter way that I actually prefer. Yeah, so hoping people will like that.
Oh, I know what I was going to ask. So this has been out in America, it's about a month, give or take. Did it come out in Australia, New Zealand before that, or is it simultaneous release?
Yeah, so that was a little bit of a hassle as well. So yeah, it came out a lot earlier in Australia and New Zealand. It came out in June, and then for the rest of the world, it came out in October. But not even the rest of the world. I think the UK, it only came out in November. So that was kind of difficult because I already had a bit of a following. That then in June, when it first came out, that was the most exciting day for me because it came out in my country and it was the first day it came out anywhere. So I made a big deal out of it. The book's out, and you get a lot of American and worldwide fans that are like, where can I get it? Like, why is it not here yet? Sort of thing. And then you have to go through and make sure that all your posts are clear that it's out for Australia, New Zealand, but it's not out for you yet. And just things like the books are slightly different as well. So I know in your edition, I think there's the extra art in the front and the back, and the penguin one doesn't have that. So the penguin one is just I stuck that on. That's one of my book plates, but it's just blank. So that was also difficult because people would receive their books and they would see different photos online and say, well, my book looks different. Or Penguin also didn't do a hardcover version. Andrews McMeel did. So then I get emails from people that are like, I can't find the hardcover version. Where's that? I would have preferred if they came out at the same time, I think. But now in hindsight, it was actually kind of fun because you get to experience that book launch sort of feeling a few times. So it was, in October when it came out, I was just as excited because it was kind of like, now the rest of you guys get it. Really excited about that. So it was quite a few months. And I think that's going to be how it is for all of them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Is this just a 3-book deal that you have, or is it open-ended?
I'm not sure how this usually works, but so when I got my first deal, it was just for Detective Beans in the Case of the Missing Hat. I handed it in and basically just naively just thought, that's it. I mean, that was fun. I'll go back to my normal life before that. And then it came out in Australia, New Zealand, and I think it was out for about 3 or 4 weeks. I was moving house, it was kind of chaotic. And my Penguin emailed me and was basically like, we like it. What else you got? What's going on now? And I was like, wait, what? And they were like, yeah, we want 2 more books. Well, we want another book at least. And then I said, okay, well, they said, we would like a book for next year. So this was already sort of June this year. And they said, and I know that if they want to publish at the same time next year, I would have to have that finished by sort of December. And there's just no way I can finish a book in half a year.
Sure.
And I just said, okay, well, I have these Cattown comics. Would you be interested in publishing those? And they looked at them and they said, yeah, we would love to do that. But we also want another book like book 1. So, they gave me a contract for 2 books. And then I went back to my US publisher and said, basically, Penguin's offered me this. Would you guys be interested in 2 more books as well? And they said yes. So I'm not quite sure how it works from there on. I guess maybe they'll see how those books do and then I'll get another contract after that. But that's where I am at the moment. I don't really know how that usually works.
Yeah. No, that's pretty normal. That's pretty darn normal.
Oh, okay,
right there.
great.
Yeah. You said that that you used to hand letter and now you're using a font. Is this a font that's based on your lettering, or is it a commercial font?
Oh, it's a commercial font. It's from that really famous, is it Comic Bam or something? No, Comic Blot. There's a really famous site.
Blambot or?
Yeah, I think it's No, Blambot is one of his fonts, I think.
Maybe it is.
But yeah, there's a site. Sorry, I can't remember it now, but he's like a famous person that makes a lot of comic fonts. And it took me a long time to find a great font as well, because when you're used to hand lettering, you kind of want something that looks like your own stuff. But I wasn't going to make a font by myself. I mean, I was already overwhelmed with the idea of making 208 pages that I was like, I don't have time. I just have to find something. And, I guess it's one of those things that you understand if you're a designy person, that each font has a kind of voice associated with it. And so you look at a whole bunch and you're like, this voice doesn't sound right. When I read it, it doesn't sound like Beans. So I looked for ages and ages, and I eventually found this font and I really, really liked it. And the only reason I actually chose a font is because I was working on the book, and I just thought, I can't hand letter a whole book. And I don't think my publishers would want that, because especially the American version has Americanizations in it. So mum is spelled M-O-M instead of M-U-M. And I'm sure they'd want everything written properly as text, especially if it's going to be translated and stuff like that. So it was only when I was working on the book that I thought, okay, well, I need to find a font. And then I've gone back retrospectively and then put the font in my Cattown.
Yeah. That I want to actually ask about the Americanization. Was that something that you did, or that an American editor went, these are the words that we need to change?
An American editor did that. Yeah. So I wasn't even quite aware of some of them. I guess because in New Zealand, we lean more British, but then we do use American, like we say, do you guys say footpath? Pavement? Like what do you say?
Like what?
Sidewalk.
On a sidewalk, yeah.
Yeah, you say sidewalk, right? Yeah. So
I would say a footpath specifically would be like through a park.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. So here, I think we would usually say footpath, but if you said sidewalk, everyone knows what you're talking about. Yeah. So it was just things like that. In New Zealand, and I think same with in the UK, we say chips to mean fries, but also potato chips.
Right.
So there's a scene where he goes into the jazz club and he has 2 fries, and he says, "I'm the backstage chip guy." So they had to change that. They had to say, I'm the backstage French fry guy, delivering quality French fries. And just things like when you guys write Mr., it always has a full stop at the end, which, things like that. I didn't know. And I think I had a word recently in one of my books. I had the word narc to mean someone, I think in America you say snitch.
For what?
For snitch, someone who snitches on someone else, like in prison or something. Yeah. So in New Zealand, and I think in UK, we call it a narc. But in America, narc is short for...
a narc, yeah.
A narc,
You can say that someone, but it becomes a verb then. It's like you narc someone out. You don't call them the narc.
Okay, yeah. So that's a bit different. And I think when I have used it in my webcomics, people get confused with the word narcotics.
Right.
Yeah, so just things like that, they have to change around. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's fine, I guess. And things, of course, like mom, they changed that, yeah.
That's interesting. And how about the coloring? Was color something that you were already doing on your webcomic, or?
Exo Comics is black and white mainly, and then every 10th comic I do a one panel sort of more arty sort of artwork, and I do those in color usually. And then when I started Cat Town, I thought, okay, I'm going to do this full color. I'm going to try and challenge myself. So Exo Comics, obviously mostly 4 panels, black and white, mainly done with pencil. And I thought when I started Cat Town, I'm going to really challenge myself. It's going to be longer, each chapter is going to be 20 to 25 panels, and I'm going to try and do it in all color and see how that goes. And I really enjoyed it. And so the book, I don't love coloring, to be honest, especially when it comes to the background. For most of the characters, I actually already had figured out what colors I wanted to paint them, because a lot of them existed in the Cat Town universe already. But I find backgrounds really difficult. That I want to make them colorful, but I don't want them to compete focus-wise with the main characters. So I find that really challenging. Like, how much detail do I put in the background so you can look at it and think, okay, that's like a cityscape. But also, I don't want to put in so much detail that now your eye is sort of weirdly drawn to it when it shouldn't be. You should be focusing more on this. So I find coloring kind of difficult, and it actually took quite a long time. Coloring the characters took no time. I loved it. Don't even have to think, put on a podcast, just go. But background, I was definitely like, oh gosh, here's another brick building. What color is this one going to be? And what color should the window frames be and stuff like that. I think things that a child doesn't even look at, that I've now obsessed a whole day over, things like that. Yeah.
It's a fascinating process.
Yeah.
Well, the book came out great, and yeah, you should be very proud and very happy of what you did here. I just think that it really works on all levels, and we all loved it. We all loved it. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's great.
No, it's my pleasure. Normally we would start wrapping up here with the question of what's coming next, but we've already answered that throughout the whole course here. So then the last question is much like the first. It's the same question with everybody. This is a series of interviews. We've been doing interviews now for 10 years, something like 250 interviews. And so there's a lot of people who watch this who want to make comics themselves. But what I hear from a lot of people is, I don't know if I'm any good. I have a lot of neuroses about my own work, about, am I good enough? Should I even bother? So what would be the piece of advice that you would give to someone who doubts themselves, who thinks that they can't possibly like publish a comic, but they want to, but they don't know how or what to do? And this can be something, this can be something practical and physical, or this can be something sort of emotional, something spiritual. But how would you answer that?
Well, first of all, I would say that feeling unfortunately never goes away, I think. I can't speak for other people, but for me, definitely not. And there are still times when I speak to other people that are very knowledgeable about comics, and I feel like I don't know anything, and I feel like they're going to judge me a little bit, even though no one's done that. I just feel like I don't know anything and I've somehow fumbled into this. And now, I'm 3 kids in a trench coat and people are starting to see that I'm 3 kids in a trench coat. So I would say that feeling doesn't go away. And I think to some degree, everyone feels like that. Not even if it's creatively. I think a lot of adults still feel like they're kids inside. So I would say you feel that feeling, of course. Natural, I would never say don't feel it or try to talk you out of it because I can't even talk myself out of it. But do it anyway. And I feel like the barrier to entry to making comics now is so low. So, you can, of course, always just draw on paper, scan it, take a photo of it, put it online. But even just things like, getting cheaper tablets, you can get lots of different, brands now. There's lots of free software now that does a lot of things that this paid stuff does. You just need to make things. And I think I get that question a lot from people in emails, I want to do what you do. How do you start? And the thing is, I just started. I think that's just the main thing. And I think a lot of the reasons why people, obviously, I'm not going to say this is the only reason why people aren't successful, because there's so much external stuff that dictates whether you do well or not, lots of luck and things like that. But I think to give yourself the best chance, you just have to keep doing it and be consistent and keep putting stuff out there. So I feel like if you want to start, draw some stuff, be critical of yourself, but not overly critical. If you can manage that, try to look at it from an outsider's point of view and think, is this good? What can I improve on? And then you just have to keep doing it, be consistent, and then post it online. Get your friends to like it, start a social media page. People are eventually going to come across it. And if they like it, they're going to stick with you. If they don't like it, they'll just go somewhere else. Who cares about those people? But I think the main thing is a lot of people give up. And I think the thing about being successful is sticking to something. And so I know a lot of people, and I think we all know a lot of people that start something and they're like really excited. I'm going to get all the gear. I think everyone also obsesses too much with gear when they start a new hobby. Like, what's the best thing you can get? What's the best tablet? What's the best software? Don't even worry about that. You just need to focus on making the thing and then hold yourself accountable. I have to make something every week, or I have to make 2 things a week. And you can't let that slide, because as soon as that slides and the one time you decide you don't want to do it anymore, or it's okay to not do it this week, next week you're going to feel like that as well. And it's like, well, I didn't make one last week, I'll let this week slide. So I feel like that's like the main thing for me, is that you have to stick with it. And the thing is, and I think the beauty with anything creative or anything, if you stick with it, you're going to get better. It's just how the universe works. There's no way you're going to be making comics for, 2 months and your comic somehow at the end of the 2 months is worse than when you began. You will always get better. And so it's very fun and exciting to get better. You just need to put in that work, and eventually, it'll happen. And then I know there's a lot of, I'm very lucky because a publisher reached out to me. So there's a lot of things that I don't know how they usually work, with submitting to a publisher and stuff like that. And I know that stuff is really difficult. And I was very lucky to get that sort of handed to me on a silver platter. But I think the one thing that I am proud of myself is that I put in a lot of work before that, so that once that opportunity came up, I was kind of ready to meet it because I had been working a lot. Yeah. Sorry, that's a long response, but I feel like a lot of people just always say to me, what do I do? And my answer is always, you just have to make it. It's kind of that simple.
Yeah.
Choose to make something and stick with it.
That's not too long of a response at all. That's a great response. Yeah. I love that response. Lee, thank you for taking the time for talking to us today. I really, really appreciate it. I love your enthusiasm. I love your vivaciousness, and I love your work. So, good on you.
Thank you so much. I've had so much fun. Thank you so much for inviting me and for choosing my book for Book of the Month. It was really, really cool. And it was really fun. I'd love to do this again. I could talk comics forever. And yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
I love it.
And I'll pop in next time in San Francisco.
Yeah, for sure. Don't go anywhere for a sec. I'll come back to you in a minute. I just need to do a little housekeeping here. Sure. Hi there. Hey, how are you doing? You doing okay? Everything's doing all right. It's a weird time, but it's Christmas, so that's cool. Look, if you're sitting at home and you want something to read and you want something interesting, can I recommend Detective Beans in the Case of the Missing Hat? This is cute. This is sweet. This is adorable. It's colorful. It's got a lot of heart. It's beautiful. You're going to love it. So go check this book out. You can get it from us. There's a button and there'll be a thing at the bottom of the thing. You can get it from us. Get it from your local store, though, too. You could get it from your library, but you'll really, really, really like Detective Beans. And I think you would be very, very, very happy with this book. So that's my advice to you, my friend, sitting at home. I do want to say that next week we go back to the Adult Club. And next week, our guests are Kieran Gillen and Stephanie Hans. That's what I mean to say. For a book called We Call Them Giants. This is a really good book. We're talking to them next Sunday. So come back and check out for that. If you are a kid and are waiting for the next kids show, the next kids show will be Mendel the Mess Up by Terry Laban. And that will be a month from now. So keep an eye out for that. I have a couple of thank yous I want to make. I want to thank Jordan, my producer, who does a bunch of stuff that none of you know anything about, but we wouldn't have a show without him. I want to thank Ben for running the show here today. I want to thank my wonderful, wonderful, wonderful staff, Zoe, Kat, Katie, and Chrissy and Max, who without them, I wouldn't have the time to do these things, to be able to do these shows. And they're great at selling comics to people. So, and help me pick comics too. So they're great. Thank them so much. I want to thank all the people who are watching the show. If you're not already subscribed, you can do the subscription thing, blah, blah, blah. I want to thank everybody who's a member of the club, and every month you get a great new book, and that's great. But most of all, more than anything else, I want to thank creators, and particularly people like Lee, who without you, I would not be in a comic book store. I'd probably be working some terrible desk job or something like that, and being very unhappy with my life. Or I'd be sitting in a store full of blank pages, which would be even worse. A big store full of blank, empty pages, like a journal store or something, I guess. I don't know. So thank you. Thank you for making comics. Thank you for being so good at it. And just thank you, Lee. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And also I realized, I forgot to thank your team as well. They've been great.
Thank you. I know they will appreciate that.
Awesome.
All right. We'll see everybody next week. Take care. Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.